Carlton King, the former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
I was undercover for Special Branch in a jihadi organisation. My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy Podcast, the show that shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security, and armed governmental personal protection operations. But actually, what we do in the round is we look at geopolitics, the politics of the world, the way nations interact with each other in the macro. But in the micro, it's how people interact with each other. And when nations interact with each other, it's already people reacting with each other. It may well be the heads of those nations that are people, but they're interacting with other people that are heads of other nations. And over the last 3 weeks, effectively that's what we've been doing. We've been looking at how the attack by Israel, the sneak attack, I've got to say, I mean, people are not saying it in the general media, but I'm going to say it loud and clear, the sneak attack by Israel and the United States on Iran, whilst the Iranians were in negotiation with the Americans, not for the first time such a sneak attack has taken place, but the second time such a sneak attack has taken place. And the reason why I'm saying that is because the people reacting with each other can only base their reaction, who are heads of state now, these people reacting with each other, can only base their reaction on their experiences. And when you've been attacked twice whilst negotiating, why would you go into negotiation for a third time? And again, we're dealing with people, even though they be heads of nations. When your nation's head, and that head happens to be your father, as it is with the Ayatollah, when your father is murdered during negotiations, and not only is your father killed during those negotiations, but your mother is killed during those negotiations, your wife is killed during those negotiations, your sister is killed during those negotiations, and not least, your daughter, your children are killed during those negotiations. When you become the head of state, how do you think that that individual is going to deal with the nation that actually killed all your family? Nobody wants to say this in the Western media, and this is the problem with the Western media today. They don't look at reality. 2 sneak attacks. One sneak attack happened with Japan in 1941 when they attacked the Americans, and they called it a sneak attack. The attack will last in history as infamy. In other words, that Japan would forever have infamy. Now, the reason why I mention that also is that the United States President, Donald Trump, who carried out his sneak attack on the Iranians, actually, this is what's interesting, had the Japanese Prime Minister sat next to him and said, well, you Japanese know about sneak attacks, you did that on us, right? So, 2 factors. One is he embarrassed the Japanese Prime Minister there and then, and you should have seen her face if you haven't seen it. But secondly, he also accepted that it was a sneak attack. So there you go. Whilst negotiating, we've carried out a sneak attack. Now, none of the pressures were on the Americans and the Israelis that were on the Japanese during the Second World War. For those who don't know, just to give you a quick rerun, what the Americans have said is, we will stop your interconnections with your oil fields that you are utilising by others. And so therefore what the Americans were doing, and look, I'm not going to go over it too much, but they were going to starve the Japanese out of oil, which would have meant that the Japanese could no longer function as an imperial state. Now, don't get me wrong, I wasn't for the Japanese, and that's not the point what we make in this programme. We're not for and we're not negative anybody. We just want to report the truth and provide the proper history. So the Japanese had created this Greater Core East Asia Prosperity Region, which obviously was Japanese hegemony in East Asia. And it was basically trying to replace Japan with the colonial countries from Europe who had taken over much of East Asia. So it wasn't as though it was even people defending themselves. It was colonials, British, the Dutch, the Americans in reality, although they didn't give themselves the colonial presence, they were the colonial leaders of the Philippines, example. They wanted to move them out and for the Japanese to come and take in. And of course the Chinese, who weren't a colonial system, but the Japanese had actually invaded Manchuria and taken that over way back in 1932. So in a horrific war. So basically what you're seeing is that the Japanese were carrying out colonialism the same as the Europeans did, just within their region and not worldwide. And the Americans were aiming to stop them because they saw that as a threat to America in the Pacific. Right, so that's that cleared up. So you understand that, and that's quite important because you have to understand the way the Japanese Prime Minister felt. And that ties into today when nobody wants to help Donald Trump, particularly when he's saying to other countries, this is what we're going to do to you. Right? We're going to take Greenland, we're going to take Canada. To the Japanese, he's saying, you did sneak attacks and we're doing a sneak attack. And by the way, we said we'd support you forever and a day, but we're taking our patriots out of your country and we're going to give them to the Israelis to protect Israel. So you see, this is happening all around, and I won't go over what's happened with the Near Eastern countries. We can call it Near East. I like West Asian countries around the Gulf, because again, their protective systems have been basically hollowed out in order to protect Israel. So again, you can see that they're looking and thinking, we are spending literally trillions of dollars, not just for our safety, but also upholding the petro-dollar and keeping the American society running through our trillions of dollars that we are spending each year. And what do the Americans do? They go and give our protection to a country that actually gives to America nothing. Let's get that totally right. Israel gives nothing to America. America gives to Israel everything in terms of military and in terms of backing and in terms of control. Just look it up. Again, we make no statement as to who's right, who's wrong. We just give you the full picture about what's going on. And the facts are that Israel doesn't put monies into the coffers of the United States as a nation. It may put monies into the pockets of United States senators, etc., but the beauty of that, and it's a superb play from the Israelis, is that the United States gives them billions and they give a couple of billion back to the people who actually run the United States through various lobbies. The United States has loads of lobbies, but this one happens to be the Israeli lobby that goes in and then buys up all of the politicians. And in that way, they can control what's being said. Don't listen to me, listen to Professor Merzheimer to understand that. He had a book out that explained that some years back. And many other people explain this process. But it's a beautiful process. You've got to understand it. You're not paying for anything. You're getting stuff free. And then what you do is you make sure that the lobbies make sure that you get all the monies you need, all the weapons you need to keep Israeli hegemony working within their area. Superb bit of political play, you can argue. So, what I'm saying is, though, now, unfortunately for the American, what has happened is that the real countries that are giving money to the America via the petrodollar, and I'm going to play you some clips that explain this to you, because I think it's very, very important to let experts do the talking, and I'm not an expert on the economy, but experts do the talk. I'm going to play you some clips so you can actually understand why the petrodollar is so important and how it functions. But first and foremost, before that, I'm going to actually let you listen to one of the most powerful men in the United States, Larry Fink, who is the CEO of BlackRock. BlackRock is the most powerful asset management company in the world. Under their management control, they have $12.5 trillion, not million, not billion, but trillion, $1,000 million under their control. And if you listen to what he says about what the absolute danger is of this war, you will understand why right now everybody in the know, in the most powerful spheres of the world's economic, political and military powers, why they are all in total and utter fear. You may be watching, I don't know, Yellowstone or some program on TV or some sports program or whatever. The people with power are actually looking and thinking, what is going on and how can we prevent what's going to be a massive recession that makes the 2008 recession look like a game of, I don't know, patience or something. I'm trying to make something very, very simple, something easy, something which really doesn't matter. And that recession took us a couple of years to get past. This recession could be absolutely devastating. That's not my statement. That's the statement from Larry Fink. So I'll let you hear it right now.
See a year from now oil at $40 a barrel, or I could see it above $150 a barrel. Well, we have two very extreme outcomes. And in my conversations throughout the world with the U.S. government, all that, to me, everybody has to recognize there's not going to be an outcome that's somewhere in the middle. It's going to either be two extremes. Is Iran a country that can be accepted by the international community? Can Iran be a country that participates in the world again? And if that outcome occurred, then you could have the Iranian oil back into the marketplace, alongside the growth of the Venezuelan oil, and you could paint a picture where oil prices could be lower than they were prior to the Iranian war. If there's a cessation of war, and yet Iran remains a threat to trade, a threat to the Straits of Hormuz, then I would argue that we could have years of above $100, closer to $150 oil.
What happens to the global economy if that happens? How do we see it?
We'll have global recession.
See, as I mentioned to you, the interesting thing what Larry Fink is saying is that he's had negotiations throughout the world. So he's looking at it from the standpoint of leaders and individuals. And when I talk about leaders, I mean people who are either heads of government, heads of state, people in the collective in heads of government and heads of state, so that would be the cabinets, etc. Then I refer to the people who probably really run the situation, which are the business people, be they the billionaires like Elon Musk, etc., billionaire businesses, or be they the bankers and the asset managers like Think, who actually spread the money around that allows the systems to function. And then you could maybe add to that the military leaders and potentially intelligence service and security service individuals who may be brought into that to make things actually happen on the behalf of governments, who are probably doing that on the behalf of the business people, because you've always got to follow the money. So nothing is ever just one thing. But what I'm saying to you is, he is worried. And that's what we need to understand from that. So why is he worried? And this is going to be the crux of basically this whole episode of the Black Spy podcast and the critical thinking concerning the Black Spy podcast as this episode unfolds. I want you to listen carefully to this. And I'm going to, as I said, enlist the assistance of an expert to explain it. And what that person is going to do, in layman's terms, which is superb, is he is going to explain to you what the petrodollar is, why it's important, and why the location of that petrodollar coming out of Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, or if you will, the Gulf nations, or if you will, West Asia, however you want to orientate the wording, why that is so important as to why the world functions as it does. And more importantly, why it's important for the United States, a government that presently has $170 trillion worth of debt, but makes round about 30 trillion a year. So therefore, what you're looking at is you're looking at a nation that is heavily, heavily indebted, but that nobody calls the debt in on. And the reason for that is because of this petrodollar connection. And basically the fact that the fiat currency, the dollar, right, is now the world's measure. In the past, that's been gold. And they're going to explain to you why that's no longer the case and why the US is in a massively preeminent position. The problem is that the Chinese now are also saying, well, hang on, why shouldn't we be the guarantor of international trade? Why shouldn't our currency be the one that guarantees payments throughout and around the world? Why should we not be the equivalent, if you will, of the petrodollar? That's where the problem lies for the United States, and particularly for Donald Trump and individuals of his ilk, which is both political and with economic power as well.
Did you know that there's a system running the world, controlling everything from prices to energy to government policy? And no, it's not the banking system, it's not the stock market, it's the petrodollar. For over 50 years, it's been shaping our world. So, what is the petrodollar? To understand the petrodollar, we first need to understand why oil is so important. We use oil to fuel our cars, planes and ships, to transport people and goods around our countries and around the globe. We use it to make plastics. In some countries, we use it to produce electricity. We even use it to manufacture chemicals, fertilizers, and many other everyday products. Our modern economy depends on oil for basically everything. Because oil is so important, countries are constantly buying and selling it. Some countries produce a lot of oil, like Saudi Arabia. Others use a lot but don't produce much, like Japan. This creates a massive global oil market. So, how did the US dollar come to control this global market? To understand this, we need to go back to World War II. At the end of the war, while most of the world lay in ruins, the US emerged with its economy and manufacturing base intact. This led to countries agreeing to make the US dollar the centre of the global financial system at the Bretton Woods Conference of 1944. This would be a new world order, backed by the US dollar. The US promised that its dollars could be exchanged for gold, and so other currencies tied their currencies to the dollar. But in 1971, President Nixon decoupled the US economy from the gold standard. This was known as the Nixon shock. This transitioned the world into a fiat currency economy rather than a gold-backed economy. Fiat currency is government-issued money that isn't backed by a physical commodity like gold or silver, and instead gets its value from public trust and economic stability. After the US stopped backing dollars with gold, the dollar stayed dominant because the US economy was so huge, and the US government was considered to be stable. Also, many global transactions were already done in dollars. So, the dollar became what's called the world's reserve currency, meaning countries hold large amounts of it in their central banks. But in 1973, the world experienced the OPEC oil crisis. This was when Arab oil-producing countries stopped selling oil to countries supporting Israel in the Yom Kippur War, including the United States, in order to gain political leverage. This caused oil prices to quadruple, leading to massive shortages and severe inflation in Western economies. In response to this, the US made a major agreement with Saudi Arabia, one of the world's largest oil producers. The deal was simple. Saudi Arabia would sell its oil only in US dollars. In return, the US would provide military protection and support. Since Saudi Arabia was the largest of the oil-producing countries, the other ones soon had to follow suit. This meant that you needed US dollars if you wanted to buy oil from most major producers, no matter where you were in the world. This system is what we call the petro-dollar system. Now, here's the big idea. If every country needs oil, and oil is sold in dollars, then every country needs dollars. Imagine you're a country like Japan. You don't produce much oil, but you need oil to power your economy. To buy oil, you must first get US dollars, second, keep dollar reserves ready, third, trade with the US or hold US assets. This creates constant global demand for the US dollar, and that demand gives the US major advantages. It keeps the dollar strong because everyone needs dollars. It allows the US government to borrow money more easily and at lower interest rates. And it means the US can use financial systems like sanctions to influence other countries because so many international transactions go through US banks. In simple terms, the petrodollar helps keep the US dollar at the centre of the world economy. What happens to the oil money that the oil-producing countries receive? They don't just store piles of cash, they invest it. This is called petrodollar recycling. For example, oil countries invest in US government bonds. They buy American companies. They invest in real estate and global markets. This means the dollars often flow back into the US financial system. It becomes a loop. First, countries buy oil with dollars. Second, oil producers earn dollars. Third, oil producers invest those dollars back into US assets. And fourthly, the dollar stays strong. So, what's the future of the petrodollar system? In recent years, some countries like Russia, Venezuela, India and Pakistan have tried to trade oil in other currencies like the euro or the Chinese yuan. This is one of the goals of the BRICS Trade Alliance, which is a partnership of countries that aims to reduce global dependence on the dollar. So, here's the million-dollar question. Why are countries that are hostile to the US still trading oil in dollars? Moving away from the petrodollar system isn't as simple as it sounds. If you suddenly switch currencies, you're not just changing payments, you're disrupting contracts, hedging systems, insurance and pricing models. The US dollar offers high liquidity, meaning that you can move billions without crashing the market, and it has strong legal protections. It's like when Facebook tried to introduce Threads to compete with Twitter. It's not so easy to suddenly get everyone to move platform when everything's already happening on Twitter. But China and Russia are reducing their dollar use selectively. Recently, Russia has increased oil trade with China in yuan. It's settled some of its transactions in rubles, and it's reduced its US Treasury holdings. China now promotes yuan-denominated oil contracts, and it encourages trade settlements in yuan with its trading partners. But here's the key. They reduce dollar use where it's politically necessary, especially under sanctions, while still using it when it's convenient and efficient. It's a gradual shift, not a revolution. But China's strategy to destabilise the dollar isn't just limited to the petrodollar system, it's also using the gold market. In 2025, gold went up a whopping 47%. That's almost twice as much as the Nasdaq and the S&P 500. These are historic numbers. But this isn't just a bull market. When gold goes up this much, it points to something much deeper. It means something is breaking in the monetary system. This is a bigger crisis that's causing the biggest gold market shake-up in a century. And what you might not realise is that it all starts with China. We're going to learn what's really behind this surge, why the gold system as we know it could be on the brink of collapse, and what you need to do about it. Let's get into it. First, let's clear up why gold is valuable in the first place. Here's a fact for you. Did you know that all the gold in the world would fit into a cube with sides 23 metres long? Gold is rare, durable and useful. It doesn't rust or decay. It can be shaped for jewellery, electronics and even medicine, and has been treasured by humans for thousands of years. Think about all the ways we use gold in our everyday language. That's as good as gold. The goose that lays the golden egg, he's the golden boy. Gold is firmly embedded in our consciousness. People also trust gold as a safe haven, because historically it holds its value even when money becomes inflated. So, why has the price of gold been surging? Most people think it's because central banks have been buying up massive amounts of gold. Well, they are. They're buying record amounts. This is because of the colossal amounts of money printing that's gone on since 2020 in response to the pandemic. Money printing was already high, but during the pandemic, it went into overdrive. Money printing inflates the currency and makes it less valuable because when there's more money in circulation, it makes the money everyone already had less valuable. Central banks are trying to protect their wealth by buying gold, which, as we've already mentioned, is a safer store of value during inflationary times. But that's not the only reason. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, the US basically seized Russia's bank accounts. This spooked governments around the world, as they suddenly felt their money wasn't safe in the US-controlled financial system. This encouraged them to buy gold, which suddenly seemed a lot safer than US treasuries. As a result, we've seen demand for gold hit never-before-seen levels. So what's going on? It all goes back to China. China has been on a gold-buying spree for over 12 consecutive months. The Chinese central bank is hoarding it. In February 2022, China divested $22.7 billion of US treasuries in order to buy gold. Divested basically means the opposite of invested, meaning they sold. They're trying to reduce their dependence on the US dollar. They've set up something called the Shanghai Gold Exchange. The aim of the Shanghai Gold Exchange is to break the grip on the paper gold market, currently held by COMEX in the US and the London Bullion Market Association, or LBMA, in the UK. So, what is the paper gold market? The paper gold market refers to financial products that give investors exposure to the price of gold without requiring them to own or hold any physical metal. Instead of trading gold bars or coins, people trade contracts, shares, or certificates that represent gold. An example of this could be a gold ETF. In short, it allows investors to trade gold without dealing with the hassle of owning physical metal. This allows for massive liquidity meaning easy buying and selling. Now, here's the problem. The paper gold market is operated through a model similar to fractional reserve banking. Fractional reserve banking is basically where banks don't actually hold all the money that's deposited in them, which allows them to invest it in all sorts of places. This works fine, as long as customers don't all try to withdraw their money at the same time, which is what happened during the 2008 financial crisis and caused many banks to fail. So, the COMEX and LBMA have operated a similar way. The paper gold that investors trade isn't necessarily tied to actual physical gold. The Shanghai Gold Exchange, however, is tied to physical gold, and it turns out that people are willing to pay a premium for the safety associated with this. Here's what's been happening. Investors have been buying cheaper gold on the COMEX and LBMA, but instead of being happy with the paper gold, they've been demanding the actual physical gold. Once they get their physical gold, they sell it on for a higher price on the Shanghai Gold Exchange, which, remember, only trades in physical gold. This is called arbitrage. It's been draining the COMEX and LBMA of their physical gold reserves, and it's because of this that the price has been skyrocketing. What we're seeing is the paper gold market start to crumble. Some people estimate that there could be up to 500 paper ounces of gold for every 1 physical ounce of gold. How could this be? Let me explain. Let's say I have a gold coin. I could lend that gold coin to my friend, and he would promise to return it to me. But then he lends it to another friend, and then that friend lends it to one of his friends, and then that friend lends it to one of his friends. This means that on paper, all 5 of us can say, we have the gold coin. But in reality, only one gold coin exists. So, what happens if one person on the chain spends the gold coin? Then we've got a problem. This is why the Shanghai Gold Exchange has been so attractive. No one trusts that the house of cards won't come crashing down. But the problem is that the gold market's not set up to withstand everyone trying to get their physical gold at the same time. COMEX are doing everything they can to try to stop people from doing this. They require you to obtain delivery notices, get your gold from approved depositories, take out a minimum of 100 ounces, pay for storage fees, transportation and insurance costs. And the list goes on. But it's not working. London's gold stockpiles have been shrinking by the highest amount on record. So, what happens next? And what can you do about it? Well, the gold markets are trying to paper over the cracks. Recently, we saw the US lease gold from India to try to show that they have more physical gold than they actually do, and therefore bring more confidence back into the markets. But history shows that this papering over the cracks strategy doesn't work. In 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement saw the entire world move onto a gold-backed standard. It would make the US dollar the reserve currency of the world, and the US dollar would be pegged to gold. But pegging to gold never works, because countries always print more money than they have. By 1961, the Bretton Woods Agreement was already fracturing. In an effort to paper over the cracks, a group of 8 central banks in the US and 7 other European countries entered the London gold pool in an effort to pool their gold together and make it look like they had more gold than they did. They worked in a concerted manner to pump gold into the market at strategic moments to suppress the spikes and manipulate the gold price. It worked for 6 years, but eventually it became untenable. When the London gold pool finally ended, we saw the gold price rise from $35 to $850 in just 9 years. So, what does this mean for us? Well, firstly, I'm not a financial advisor, and this is not financial advice. But we can expect the price of gold to continue to rise. Countries around the world are currently engaging in massive stimulus, so gold will continue to be the hedge against inflation. But there's a much bigger demand for physical gold over paper gold. So, if you're currently holding paper gold, you might want to consider moving it into physical gold. Gold mining stocks should continue to perform well, again because of this demand for real physical gold. But whatever you do, make sure gold is part of a well-diversified portfolio and never invest more than you can afford to lose. You don't want all your eggs in one basket.
So I'll close the explanations there from Lock, Stock and Finance. I find them brilliant short explanations. If you know about these things already, it might seem as though he's trying to teach you how to suck eggs. But for the vast majority of us who are not fully conversant or familiar with the way the gold markets work or understanding petrodollars, then I find them a superb explanation, short, sharp, direct, and you can understand. And when you put those together with the actual war in Iran and the attacks by the Israelis and the Americans, you can see how the American is beginning to lose out. So I just give you one example. What Iran has been able to do, as anybody who's been watching the TV or reads the news or frankly looks at the internet or anything to do with the war, will understand, even against the propaganda that one gets in the West about how successful the Iranians have been, or should I really say not successful the Iranians have been, when they're actually not telling the truth about the way things are going. And after all, yes, in war, everybody hides the truth. So the reality is even those news media diktats, those news media outlets that are orientated towards the United States and Israel, even they have to admit that the Straits of Hormuz are closed to Western shipping. And what everybody who listens also knows is that various ships are allowed through. One is Chinese, Russian, etc., etc. We also know that what the Iranians have said is that they're going to charge about $2 million a ship to allow ships to travel through the Straits of Hormuz. So it's quite interesting that what you can see is, and by the way, when they say they're going to cost $2 million, they're saying in yuan, so in Chinese currency. So what they're going to do is try and use the Chinese currency as the currency in which one can utilize world trade. So that's quite an interesting thing in itself. And as I mentioned earlier, President Xi has already said that he wants to make the Chinese currency one that can be utilized throughout as a reserve currency for any type of business transactions. Never been said before, but now he's actually articulated that as part of the next 10-year plan. Indeed, it might even be the 5-year plan. So this is where we are. It's a new world order, a new world understanding coming into play, a multinodal world where more than one body is supreme within various areas. And we're going away from what you could argue is US world hegemony. And so therefore, it is very, very important what has been taking place. Moreover, we should also consider what the US has been forced into doing. And it's quite interesting that on a Meet the Press interview, Scott Bessent, just last week, Scott Bessent argued that the facility that he is now saying is available for people to buy both Russian and Iranian oil was some kind of masterstroke to, if you will, outplay the position of the Iranians and, by extension, the Russians. I mean, listen to this interview on Meet the Press, and I'm going to leave you with that because what it's going to show you is the absolute problem that the United States has got itself into with this conflict without even thinking it through. And some argue that the reason for it not being fought through was because the conflict was actually brought into being by the Israelis and that the Americans seemingly follow them blindly into this particular process. As it was put by Secretary of State Rubio, they knew that, and I played you this on one of my previous episodes, but that they knew that the Israelis were going to attack, and therefore, had the Israelis attacked, they, the Americans, would be attacked by the Iranians, because the Iranians would assume that the Israelis had attacked because the Americans had allowed them to, and hence Americans would have died. So therefore, to preempt this, the Americans went along with attacking the Israelis. I just have one point to put there to that. Why did the Americans not say to the Israelis, do not attack? And now that sounds easy, and people say, well, Israel's Israel and America's America. That's not true. The Americans have massive amounts of control over Israel if they would care to use it, as practically every other president has to a lesser or greater degree. You can argue that President Obama used that leverage and it caused him big problems. So that's why, subsequently, I guess, that the other Democratic president that came in to be, Biden, actually didn't use it at that level. Or one could just state that Biden was more supportive of the state of Israel than Obama was. Either way, they did put up red lines against the attack against Iran because it was assessed that it would be problematic. And I know that that's what Trump was told. It would be problematic, but he chose not to believe it. And we showed you that in last week's programme when you listened to the director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, when she said that in front of the committee. So it's not something that isn't known. So with this, I leave you with an interview given by Scott Bessent answering the question, why is the United States now basically giving money to a country that it's at war with? And the reason for that is it wasn't thought through, and it isn't, I'll say it again, isn't as easy as one thought it would be to defeat Iran, if it's even possible at all. So therefore the US is looking for any way out, any off-ramp, even President Trump. However, I surmise that President Trump probably won't be able to bite that bitter pill and may do something suicidal with his forces. But anyway, that's the military end. This is the end to an economic overview, and you can now understand why Bessent has to put this forward at the meeting with Meet the Press.
So that's a possibility.
All options are on the table.
All right, let me talk about your announcement this past week. On Friday, the Treasury Department lifted sanctions on Iranian oil stored on tankers, a move that would effectively allow Iran to get more than $14 billion of oil revenue. Why is the U.S. helping to fund a country that it's currently at war with, Mr. Secretary?
Again, Kristen, why don't we have good facts here? That Iranian oil was always going to be sold to the Chinese. It was going to be sold at a discount. So which is better, Kristen? Which is better? If oil prices spiked to $150 and they were getting 70% of that, or oil prices below 100, it's better to have them where they are now. And to be clear, we had always planned for this contingency. About 140 million barrels are out on the water. In essence, we are jujitsuing the Iranians. We are using their own oil against them. We have a much better line of sight, to be clear, at Treasury when this oil goes to. If it goes to Indonesia, if it goes to Japan, if it goes to Korea, we have a much better line of sight and are able to block accounts that the oil goes into. When it goes into China, it completely gets recycled. So to be clear, that 14 billion number is grossly overstated.
Let me unpack what you're just saying. First of all, how much is it? And second of all, I don't hear you disputing that Iran will get some of the money.
Iran already gets a huge amount of the money because Iran is the largest sponsor of state terrorism, and China has been funding them.
So it was always part of the plan to unsanction Iranian oil?
Again, we unsanctioned the Russian. At Treasury, we plan for all contingencies. We have break-the-glass plans, and to be able, this oil is floating out in Asia, and it is mostly our Asian allies. The U.S. gets virtually no oil from the Gulf. We are energy sufficient. So when we unsanction this, rather than the oil going to China, it can go to Japan, it can go to Korea, it can go to Indonesia, it can go to Malaysia.
And it can go to Iran, too. I mean, isn't the point that the sanctions were in place to prevent Iran from getting any of the money? They will have access to some of the money now.
Again, Kristen, you're missing the point. So please listen to me. They were getting it from China anyway.
All right, let me talk about the real world impact of this, because you're talking about 140 million barrels of Iranian oil, and that's just a little bit more than what the world uses in one day. How much can that really change prices here
again,
at home?
Chris, terrible framing.
Well, how much can it change prices here at home? Can you talk to consumers? How much will it change prices here at home?
Let me explain. 140 million barrels, about 20 million barrels a day comes out of the Gulf. About 5 million has been repurposed by the Saudis, by the UAE. So we're at a 15 deficit. About 1.5 is Iranian oil that comes out. So we are at between a 10 and 14 million deficit on a daily basis. So if you think about 140 million barrels, that's between 10 days and 2 weeks of supply. And one of the reasons the prices in the U.S. of West Texas crude are below $100, and we have not seen this massive spike as we did during the beginning of Russia-Ukraine, is because we are well supplied in the market. Whether it is the Russian oil, whether it is the Iranian oil, or it is the largest SPR release in history done by a coalition of 32 countries, 400 million barrels.
All right, let's talk about the Russian oil, which you just raised. The administration did ease oil sanctions on Russia earlier this month. You had initially defended imposing those sanctions, calling Russian exports, quote, oil that funds the Russian war machine. If the point of the sanctions was to stop funding the Russian war machine, why is the administration effectively rewarding Russia now?
Again, Kristen, you're missing the point. Which is better? Does Russia get more money if oil goes to 150 and they get 70% of that? That's 105. Or if oil stays below 100, so they're getting less money. Our analysis shows that the maximum extra amount that Russia could get would be $2 billion, which is 1 day's of the Russian Federation's budget.
But understood, but they wouldn't have gotten any of that with the sanctions in place.
I don't know.
But would they have gotten any of that in place?
Whoever does your research, you should get rid of, because they were getting it. It was going into China. China was buying over 90% of the Russian oil, and it was.
But what's the point of sanctions if not to punish Russia, if not to punish countries?
Again, we have no ability to do that to China. If China wants to be a bad actor, but we were substantially able to degrade their exports. Their exports have dropped about 25% when the rest of the world isn't buying it. So exports are down, but there was a lifeline into China. Now we've opened up that to everyone else.
Okay, just to be clear, though, you did defend imposing those sanctions in the first place. Let me ask.
Just to be clear, it is a maximum of $2 billion. So let's have good framing on this. Okay,
let's talk about the overall cost of this war. The administration's asking Congress poised to an additional $200 billion in additional funding for this war. Some Republicans who could cast key votes on this are expressing hesitation or outright opposition. Take a listen to them, and then I want to get your reaction on the other side.
Are there any initial red flags for you?
No, I mean, it's a lot of money. I'll go through it, see what they need.
I am a no. I've already told leadership I am a no on any war supplementals. I am so tired of spending money elsewhere.
Should President Trump have gone to Congress on the front end of this war if he was going to ask for Congress's help now for more funding?
Again, President Trump was within his authorities, under the War Powers Act, to initiate this action. And we actually now we have plenty of money to fund this war. What we are doing is this is supplemental. President Trump has built up the military as he did in his first term, as he is now doing in his second term, and he wants to make sure that the military is well supplied going forward.
Would the administration ever raise taxes in order to fund this war?
Again, Kristen, the terrible framing. I think that.
It's just it's a simple question that I think a lot of people have.
It's a ridiculous question.
Well, what can you answer it?
Why would we do that? That we have plenty. We have $1 trillion in this year's budget for the military, and President Trump, even before the conflict started, had said that he would like to further build out the military.
So, just is raising taxes under consideration at all? If you're saying you have plenty of money,
not at all.
That was Scott Besant. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll simply leave you with this question: would you buy a used car from that man See you again next week.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.